Is there a mic? Are we good? Good afternoon, early evening, everybody. It's that time of day. We're going to go ahead and get started as we are at already at 5:30, hard to believe. So welcome, come on in, grab a seat, grab a snack if you'd like. It's good to see you all here. My name is Josh Blanchard. I'm one of your Summit County Commissioners. And thank you for joining us for our inaugural County 101 series. You know, this is something we've been talking about for a couple of years, and because of just the uncertainties around COVID and some of the other issues, we haven't been able to launch it until now, but we are very excited about launching our County 101 series. This will be an ongoing series hosted by your county commissioners, where we bring in a panel of experts to really talk about issues that are relevant to Summit County, to our way of living, to our businesses, to our workforce, to our full-time residents, to our seasonal residents, and all of the issues that really are important to all of you in this room. And so we thought, what better issue to start this series off than water? So you can see that the title of Summit County's 101 series for tonight is Understanding Colorado's Water Challenges. And so this is, of course, a public symposium on the state and Colorado's water crisis and its impact to our local watersheds. I'm going to very quickly introduce our speakers this evening and go down what our next hour to an hour and a half is going to look like. So we're so excited to host such a panel of experts representing all sorts of agencies from across the state, across the region, and even locally. Taylor Hawes from Colorado River District is here. Marielle Cowden is also from Colorado River District. Thank you for being here. Our Water Commissioner, Troy Wineland, is here this evening. Kendra Fuller, Executive Director of the Blue River Watershed Group, is here. And then Rachel Zarowen from High Country Conservation Center is here as well. And so we want to again say thank you for being here. I really quickly mention, when you walked in, there is a jar with some note cards. If you have an idea for a future topic for County 101 series, be thinking about that. Drop that in the jar on your way out. I will tell you that very quickly I'll mention that we have an upcoming series with a panel hosted by Commissioner Pogue to talk about the definitions around housing, specifically AMI, or Area Immediate Income. You may hear that a lot. So that's coming up soon. And then Commissioner Lawrence will be sharing an update on our child care issues here in Summit County. So pay attention for those coming up soon. We are going to ask our panel of experts basically just to come up and speak. They'll give a broader introduction about what they do and how it's relevant to our issue this evening. We're going to try to move through the presentation over the course of about an hour or so. We'll ask you to hold your questions, write down your questions, and then we're hoping that there is a few minutes at the end of the formal presentation to take broad general questions. We will wrap up the actual presentation at about 6:30, but all of our experts have graciously volunteered to stay until about 7. So come and ask those more detailed questions with our folks. They're going to stick around until about 7. So with that, again, thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to Taylor.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate just the interest in the issue. So just a quick piece of background about me. I'm a water lawyer by training. I've been working on Colorado River issues for 25 years. You can make a lifetime of this. And I've worked in a lot of different realms. I've started my career here in Summit County, working for Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, Water Quality Quantity Committee. I went to the River District as associate counsel. And my day job now is, for the last 14 years, I am the Colorado River Program Director for the Nature Conservancy. So we work from the top of the system all the way to Mexico. My slides say the Nature Conservancy, but just because it was easier to take those and adapt them for today. But I'm here as the representative for Summit County on the River District Board. So that's the reason for us organizing today, is kind of bring more education and information to the community. And our goal really is to help foster a better understanding of these very complex issues. Water law is complex. It's confusing. There's a lot going on. It's in the newspaper every single day right now, and it's in the national news every single day right now. And the future will not look like the past. So we really wanted to make sure you all in our community have a really good understanding of the issues so you can engage on these really important topics. We also want to make sure that at the end of today, you know who to talk to when you have questions, because it's going to be in the news a lot, and we just want to make sure that you know your local experts as well as the folks in the region. Okay, now I have to make sure. Here. Okay. So I thought so I'm going to do the Water Law 101. Marielle's going to talk more about the Colorado River issues and what's going on in the basin. So when I teach Water Law 101, the first thing I like to start off with is just helping people think about it in a historical context. And if you look at this map, it's pretty clear that it's much drier on the western side of the country than it is on the eastern side of the country. But when the United States was settled, it was, people came in to an area that looked a lot like England, and they ended up adopting a water law system that looked a lot like England's, which is called riparian law. And it's based all on reasonableness and sharing, and you share the resource and you share in managing the resource. That is not at all what we have out here. Our system was based on more trying to settle the West. And we encouraged people to come out here. And the first folks that came out here were farmers and miners, people that needed water to do what they were going to do. And yet the water wasn't always where they needed it to be. And so we created a legal system that allowed a few things. First, those who got here first got the best right. So they're the more senior right, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in addition, they could move the water wherever they needed it to be, which is why we have Dillon Reservoir here and a big pipe and a straw that takes water over to Denver. So that's not how it is in the East at all. They can't move water out of the basin. Another important difference is in the East, it's common law, which means it's based on court cases, a body of court law that's built over decades and decades. Here, it's statutory law, which means it can be changed. It can adapt to what's happening in our society, and I'll talk about that in a minute too. Okay, it's very touchy. Okay, so you may have seen this before, or you may have heard the expression, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over. We live by these words in the West, but I think really what it tells us is how important this scarce resource is, and how it is something that people will fight over. And so water law certainly can be very contentious. And it's something that we all need. It's needed for every single sector that that in our society depends on water. And I would just say that in the West, it is, all of our Western states have a system similar to Colorado, but they're all a little bit different. So we're going to dive into Water Law 101 here in Colorado and what that looks like, but just know it's a little bit different in each of our states. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the elements. Our system's called prior appropriation, and what that means is prior, who came first, who was the first right, and then appropriation. And what that means is kind of who claimed it first. And so as I mentioned, who were the first people to come here? It was the farmers and the miners. Well, the farmers often still have those very senior water rights. Water rights around here for farmers, if they got here first, they might be 1890, 1900 water rights. On the east slope, may even be earlier than that. So they're really our first water rights. In the old days, the other thing you had to do was put everybody on notice that you were using the water, that you were staking your place in the line. And so that's why we have, with a few exceptions, a diversion requirement, meaning you have to actually take the water out of the river to put it to beneficial use. And I'll explain that in a minute too. But that is kind of leftover, a remnant from the old days of, when you were a farmer and you wanted to show your neighbor that you were going to take water out of the river and you were going to get your spot in line, you went out and dug a ditch, and that put everybody on notice. So beneficial use is the other key component. You have to prove that you're putting your water to beneficial use. Beneficial use is defined by statute in Colorado, and it is a long, long list, and we add to it sometimes. I don't think we've ever taken away any kinds, but so it's everything from agricultural use to domestic use to watering golf courses to dust suppression, to snowmaking, to beer making. So it's just as our societal values have changed, we add beneficial uses, but it has to be in that statute for you to be able to get a water right. So another component or element you might hear a lot about when you're reading stories in the news is the use it or lose it aspect of our water right system. And what that means is that because it is such a scarce resource, we want to ensure that it's being used to the best extent possible and that it's not being wasted. So if somebody's not using water to irrigate a golf course, we want that water to go back into the system for others to be able to use it. We want to discourage any kind of waste. Related to that, if you have a water right and you don't use it for 10 consecutive years, it can be put on the abandonment list by Troy's agency, which you may or may not mention, but it can be put on the abandonment list, and if you don't contest that, it will be abandoned. So there is a use it or lose it component to this. In addition, we have an anti-speculation provision, which just means it's not like land where you can go out and buy it and hold on to it until one day somebody wants to come and develop it. You actually have to use it, and if you're not using it for a beneficial use, you can't hold on to it to sell it down the road and make money off of it. It's a public good. We don't want to encourage that kind of speculation. Okay, so we also have a very robust administration system. We have what they call water courts. So if you wanted to get a water right, you have to go to a special water court. We have several of them around the state. There's one in each basin, all the big basins, so the Arkansas, the South Platte, the Colorado. Each one has its own water court and their own water judge. And so you actually have to go to a special court, which is why we have so many water lawyers in Colorado, to get a water right. And then once you get your water right, there's a whole nother layer of administration. Troy's job is, and he'll talk more about this, is to make sure everybody's kind of living within the bounds of the rules, making sure they're using their water right as their decree says. You get a decree. If you go get your water court, you get a decree. And then the other important thing you'll hear about in the news a lot lately is there's two ways you can measure your water rights. One is direct flow, which is measured by cubic feet per second. So you'll see CFS in the news a lot. That's just a way to measure that flow right. And if you have a direct flow right, it means you've got a certain amount of flow coming off the river that you are entitled to take. Blue River below Dillon right now is running about 55 CFS, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. The other way you might get a water right is a storage right, and that is measured in acre feet, which is about a football field 1 foot deep in water, 326,000 gallons, lots of ways to slice and dice it. Dillon Reservoir is about 254,000 acre feet. So you can kind of see, we measure it differently. And so you'll see both acre feet and CFS in the paper. Okay, so now I'm turning to a few of the questions I get a lot lately, or just get when people are trying to understand these issues. I wanted to just touch on the sector use, because a lot of people think, oh, if cities would just conserve more, we'd be fine. Cities use, and these are stats for the whole 7 Colorado River Basin states, and these percentages vary a little bit, but they're pretty true universal, like globally. Irrigation uses about 70 to 80% of our water. Cities use about 12 to 17%, and you can see these other smaller sectors. I also wanted to mention environmental and recreational use, because that's something very important to us here in Summit County. We're all here because of the environmental values and the recreational opportunities. So we have something called in-stream flow water rights, which is environmental flows for the benefit of the environment. They were not added to the statute as a beneficial use till 1973, so they are very junior. So when you hear people talk about senior water rights and who's getting their waters, those environmental water rights are often last on the list or pretty junior in the system. Recreation has come on even more recently, and that law was passed in 2001, and it allowed for it's a really wonky name, recreational in-channel diversion, Wait, did I say that right? Yeah, so a little brain spasm. RICD, and that was just adopted in 2001, and that's for like kayak parks, boat chutes, for rafting. So those are the kinds of things that have just come on later, but it shows you how our laws can adapt to bring on new values. And I should say, the in-stream flow water rights can only be held by the state of Colorado, the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So a private person can't go out and get a water right for that. Similarly, recreational in-channel diversions can only be held by a public entity, an agency, county, local government. I just wanted to mention key agencies. Again, part of our goal is so that when you walk out of here and you read news stories, you'll recognize these agencies that are kind of running things. Colorado Water Conservation Board is a state agency, also called the CWCB, and they are the more public-facing, policy-oriented agency in Colorado. They deal with our interstate negotiations, they deal with grants, they run our state planning process, they hold these in-stream flows. So they're kind of our public-facing entity, and you'll see them in the paper a lot. The state engineer is more private, kind of administration focused, and again, that's Troy's agency. They're doing kind of more behind the scenes, making sure everybody's administering the water rights on that more local and regional level. And then the other entity that you'll read a lot about is the Bureau of Reclamation. They are a federal agency. They sit under the Department of Interior, and they manage and build a lot of the bigger reservoirs, so Lake Mead, Lake Powell, Green Mountain Reservoir. So they'll turn up in the news a lot as well because they're a really critical player in terms of managing this resource on a regional scale. Okay, my last slide. Just before I pass it over to Marielle, I really wanted to highlight the fact that climate change is water change. And so we're seeing that play out in the news everywhere, whether it's too much, too little. You know, there's droughts in places that used to not see drought. I just saw that the shipping traffic on the Mississippi just came to a halt in big, huge chunks because the water levels are so low. Likewise, we're seeing flooding in strange places in Europe, and then 6 months later, extreme drought. That is climate change, and we're seeing it right here based on rising temperatures. This part of the lower 48 is warming faster than any other part of the lower 48, and that's playing out with scarcity in terms of, you know, hotter temperatures, drier soils. These lovely fall days are we're borrowing from our spring runoff right now. So we do need these rains to kind of keep the soil moist so that we capture more of our runoff in the spring. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marielle.
That is touchy.
I know, it's very sensitive.
Very sensitive. Thanks, Taylor, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight. My name is Marielle Cowden. I am the Director of Public Relations with the Colorado River District. As Taylor mentioned and as was introduced, she is on our Board of Directors for Summit County. The Colorado River District represents 15 West Slope counties, and each county has a director that represents them. So we're really proud to have Taylor on our board. We're also very thankful that this event exists. We're so glad for any commissioners and water experts who've joined us today, and for the folks who've organized this event, because really this is about the public really understanding that 101 level. Water issues, especially out west, are incredibly complicated and have a huge barrier to entry for your average person. And with crises mounting, as we're seeing in the news so much today at an accelerating exponential rate, it's even more important that people understand and have access to that. And so that's why I'm so glad to be a part of this, and hope I do a good job breaking down some very big Colorado River Basin-wide issues as well as West Slope issues that Taylor primed up wonderfully to you all today. I actually, my original career was not based in water. I studied art when I was young, and then got into some environmental nonprofit work. I ended up working with breweries a lot about protecting forest watersheds to make sure that they had clean surface water sources. Beer is over 90% water, so when Taylor said water is for beer, that is a part of what makes Colorado great too. So there are all sorts of uses that water is important for. But I realized I wanted to get more involved, and water was just so complex. I didn't understand the language, and I come from a family of teachers. I want to make sure I can break that down for people. So I went back and I got my master's in environmental law and policy. I am not a lawyer, but I got my degree to make sure I could help translate that so that other people don't have to go and get a degree. And when I got my job at the River District, I found that as a great opportunity to help translate some of these major issues we're seeing in my home, which is Colorado. So without further ado, just in case anyone here is unfamiliar with the River District, we were formed in 1937 to protect West Slope water. That's our basic mission. We're local governments. Like I said, we represent 15 counties on Colorado's western slope. And we were formed in 1937 because, as many of you know here living right by the divide, there was a lot of water that goes across the mountains over to the east slope. And back in 1937, there was a ton of water that was being moved over and proposals to bring even more over to the booming Front Range. But West Slope folks who were living over here had no voice for that. So the Colorado River District was formed to protect West Slope water users and all of the different entities. So it's everything from agriculture, municipal water rights, recreation, those in-stream flow, interests that people have because they like to go fly fishing and rafting, things like that. And we do that through legal, policy, technical means, through outreach and education, and we have a new grant program that I'll mention in a little bit. So our mission in its actuality is to lead in the protection, conservation, use, and development of the water resources of the Colorado River Basin for the welfare of our district, and to safeguard for Colorado all waters of the Colorado River to which the state is entitled. So we have this dual mission. One is to look out for our West Slope parties, anyone who's a water user, which is everybody on the West Slope. And then we have this interstate level. So not only are we focused on protecting West Slope water, we're actually supporting the state of Colorado in the work that it's doing right now with all of these interstate negotiations. So I'll give you a picture of that big Colorado River system in just a second, and we'll talk more about that. So here's a really great visual we love to bring up. You can see this outlined in black is the whole Colorado River Basin. And it's an immense scope. It covers 7 states. It goes down into Mexico, so 2 countries. It has 30 sovereign tribal nations there and 11 national parks. It serves 40 million people, and those numbers are only growing. It's important to note that the gray areas outside of those black lines are areas that receive Colorado River water outside of the natural river basin. So everything from Colorado's Front Range, obviously, to the Wasatch Front, Salt Lake City, San Juan, Chama Project, and then of course, the big metropolises of San Diego and Los Angeles over in the Imperial and Coachella Valleys and the Colorado River Aqueduct. So it's a huge amount of people that need Colorado River water. We in our Colorado River District are up in that top right corner, and the flows, we're in the headwaters of the Colorado River itself. It's always been fascinating to me that 65% of the Colorado River's natural flows actually come from our basin. And if you add in Southwestern Conservation District, which is that southwest corner of Colorado, it's actually 70%. So as we talk more about the climate issues that Taylor has queued up and the issues that you're seeing all over the news, you'll understand why that's such a huge issue. Because multi-decadal drought continues, the issues we're facing with the Colorado River system, both here and across in other states, is two-part. It's a math equation. There's too much demand, not enough supply, and part of that has to do with a lot of overuse in the lower basin states, which I'll actually go back just a second. Whoops. Just so you can see, I didn't explain, we have 7 states. Basically, that is broken up right at the middle where that Lee's Ferry is, marked in red, right around Lake Powell. That is the marker where, when we had the Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922, 100 years ago. We'll talk about that in a moment. They divided the Colorado River Basin into upper basin states and lower basin states. We're in the upper basin states, along with Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico. Arizona, Nevada, and California are lower basin states and use far more water than we have been using in the last number of years, and we'll talk about why that is. Ooh, so touchy. But the other part of the issue that we're dealing with is drought and climate change. And that's something that here in the headwaters, we live within our hydrology. We see it happening. We see less snow. We see the dry soils that are absorbing what runoff we do have. And the climate change that we're dealing with, there's been a lot of studies about this. This is just such a powerful fact that we've been using a lot when we communicate this. For every 1 degree Fahrenheit rise in average temperature, stream flow is reduced between 3 to 9%, with most studies actually leaning towards that 9%. And that is something that we see very much physically, but people in the lower basin who have big reservoirs above them, they have a tap that the Bureau of Reclamation turns on. They haven't been seeing that over the years until very recently. But our reservoirs is our snowpack. Snowpack is the reservoir system that we use in our hydrology and that the rest of the system needs. And with rising temperatures, in our district alone being between 3 and 5% over the last 100 years, that's a significant reduction in water. Now I'm going to have a very wonky engineering graph up here, but I'm not going to dig too deep on all the bars and lines. It's mostly just to show, and I have a few animations I'll kind of skip through so we don't take too much time on this. But this shows the flows from the Colorado River system into Lee's Ferry. And you can see over the years how, on average, it's declined. That black line is basically, when we talk about the Colorado River Compact in a second, that's how much water they assumed would be in existence on the river always. They actually, when they signed the compact 100 years ago, they figured, we'll split it in half. We have about 17 million acre feet. Taylor mentioned acre feet as a measurement of water. When we talk about the whole Colorado River system, we're talking million acre feet, which is enormous. They thought we'd have about 17 million acre feet to work with, and that they'd come back later and decide how they would divvy up the surplus. Obviously, that's not the case. The total average has actually been, over these last 100 years, around just under 15 million acre feet. And then that sad little red line on the far right, that's where we've been in our last 10-year average. And so that is just a little bit, it's somewhere around 12 million acre feet. And another thing that I'll mention just in terms of this graph and why it's been plummeting so rapidly, that climate change element has been huge, the aridification, the dryness of our soils, as water and as snow melts and turns into our rivers and streams, it gets absorbed by that soil. So in 2021, we had about 89% average snowpack, which not too bad. But the inflow to Lake Powell was, I believe, about 34%. And the reason for that, and the reason for those red lines, is because of this aridification that we're experiencing. The soils are just absorbing. They need to absorb that moisture before it can run off. And that's something that has improved slightly in the last year, but we're still a long ways away. So we're going to talk about this compact that I've mentioned, the 1922 Colorado River Compact. We're celebrating its 100th anniversary, but obviously there are a lot of things that happened when that was signed that they didn't account for, and we're facing those challenges today. So why the compact? Basically, the compact was signed because, as Taylor mentioned, the law of water in the West had to do with first in time, first in right. And if we stuck with that alone as the law of the river, then California would have had all the rights to our water. They were expanding, they were blowing up at an exponential rate, and they were claiming that water as their own. And it was actually Colorado's representative that said, hey, if we don't change something, Colorado and these other states above California are not going to have anything to work with. So a bunch of these state representatives got together to sign the Colorado River Compact. While California was looking like this, Colorado was looking a little more like this. And honestly, we have a lot of ag farmland today still, so we'll talk about water uses a little bit more as Taylor outlined those. But in the 1922 Colorado River Compact, they said, instead of just doing first in time, first in right, let's make sure we divvy up this water so that it's equally apportioned. That's the language, equal apportionment, and that's what I want you to hang on to here, is we're going to separate it basically half and half. So when they thought we had, say, 15 million acre feet to work with within the United States area, 7.5 million acre feet will go to those upper basin states. You guys get half. 7.5 will go to the lower basin states. And you just have to make sure that you in the upper basin, you make sure that the lower basin gets their 7.5 as well. So there have been a lot of criticisms since then. We know mistakes were made now. A lot of people were left out. Tribal voices have still been left out of a lot of these conversations, and we're gradually rectifying those mistakes. And the best available science was ignored. A lot of the modeling actually was saying that there was going to be a lot less water in the river, even as far back as 1948. 1948, the upper basin states came together and signed their own compact to make sure that within our 4 states we were distributing water in an equitable way. And they did that by divvying up states' water by percentages. While in the lower basin, they have those by actual million acre foot water measurements. So it just goes to show you that back in 1948, us in the upper basin, we already knew. We live in the hydrology. We know the water is a finite resource. There's not always going to be enough to go around. So why don't we look at it in terms of percentages instead of those hard figures? Then as it moved along, things like the Central Arizona project were approved, even when then scientists were saying there is not enough water in the system for this, but we're going to approve this anyway, and build some of these large projects, federal projects that happened even on our west slope of Colorado as well. So it's not like we don't have those projects within our boundaries also. But the modelers just kept saying, and now are saying, that we shouldn't even be thinking about how are we adjusting to a 12 million acre foot river, but how should we adjust to, in reality, a 9 million acre foot river. Oops. So, there we go. So essence of the deal, equitable apportionment. This is what we keep coming back to in our Colorado state support discussions, is how do we make sure that water is equitably apportioned. And that's getting ever more complicated with growth, development, but then also this soft and hard demands. It's, we have agriculture. We need water to go to agriculture because we all eat food. But we also need it because water supports recreation economies. It supports municipalities. As municipalities grow and build more housing, they need water for those areas. And so this whole idea of whether or not we'll get into legal battles, definitely will talk more about how things get divvied up. If those battles happen, how are they going to determine who gets water? Is it going to be cities? Is it going to be agriculture? Agriculture certainly has a large target on its back and gets a lot of heat for that because, as Taylor mentioned, it out of, in Colorado and across the whole basin, it takes up a lot of the water proportionally. But this is the reality of what we've been looking at on the whole Colorado River system. So again, remember I said equitable apportionment. In the compact, they said 50-50, half-half, but in the last 10 years, this has been the reality. The lower basin states have been using about 60% of the water, and we've been using about 4.4 million acre feet of water in the upper basin states. Without even dropping in the last year, we managed to conserve, as an upper basin, 1 million acre feet of water, just because we live in the hydrology and we know what's happening. So people are cutting back on their own without incentives up here in the upper basin. Lower basin has had those reservoirs above them and can turn on that tap. And 1.5 million acre feet has been going to Mexico. That's been staying pretty steady. Mexico has, just as a side clarifying thing, been willing to make adjustments, but we're not going to talk about that too much because that gets deeper into the weeds. So looking at a 9 million acre foot Colorado River, which is what a lot of the scientists are modeling, this is what it would be if we kept with the 60-30 split that we currently have been seeing, which is that the lower basin would get about 4.5, which is what we have been using traditionally, and then we would get 2.25 across our 4 states. And one thing that is really important to take note, I don't know if this is going to play, it's a little animation. One of the reasons that the lower basin has been using so much more water than we have is because, like I said, the Bureau of Reclamation gets to turn on their tap from Lake Mead, which is fed by Lake Powell, which is fed by our rivers and our snowpack. But they have not been calculating the evaporative losses that happen from those huge reservoirs. And then also they have not been accounting for the transit losses that happen when water is delivered to different contractors down in the lower basin. So we think this is a huge error. It's just a simple mathematical error. If they accounted for this, it would make up for about 1.5 million acre feet of water. So we're urging the Bureau of Reclamation and the states, as they renegotiate interim guidelines, which is not a 101 thing, but we can talk about that in the Q&A, that they address this first, because this is a huge amount of water that they could account for immediately as they're calling for more reductions. So now that I've left you with all that existential dread, I will move on to some positive stuff, which is that what the Colorado River District is doing. We have a community funding partnership that some of you may know about. We have been putting out over $5 million to 44 projects across the West Slope so far, and that's just counting. We have a board meeting next week, which Taylor will be a part of, to approve more projects, send more money out the door. to support multi-benefit, multi-use water projects. So it's helping people, bridge divides, having our ag communities and our rec communities and our municipalities work together to find common solutions to water issues and conserving more water. And what's even better is that it's also helping these people leverage federal dollars that have been flowing rapidly, which is a great thing. So we've been able to help leverage almost $45 million for those people in federal dollars as well, and some state dollars. So I'm going to leave it there. I think I've gone way over time, but I want to thank you all again for being here and here to take questions afterwards. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Troy Wineland. I'm your water commissioner here in the Blue River Basin. I just want to share, Josh had tasked us all with providing a slide or two for this presentation. Got to admit, I was thinking of providing something a little more provocative, but in the interest of time, and I guess I'll just provide you a vanilla tonight, and if you want Chunky Monkey, I'm happy to sit down over a beer or coffee anytime and dive into a lot of the more of the details that were shared by Taylor and Marielle. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. So in a nutshell, basically my job purview, my job duties, touch on either directly or indirectly just about everything that has been shared already in the previous two presentations. So I am an employee of the Colorado Division of Water Resources, which is it falls under the umbrella of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. So a couple of my sister agencies are Colorado Water Conservation Board and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. There's also DREAMS, which is the Division of Reclamation, Mining and Safety. So I'm a state employee whose area of purview is the Blue River Basin. And it was mentioned, I believe, Taylor had mentioned, there are 7 primary basins within the state. And each of those divisions is then subdivided into districts. And so this is District 36, Blue River Basin, which is tributary headwater to the Colorado River, if you didn't already know that. I'm sure most of you probably do. So to get into a little more of the detail as far as what I do, basically, I've been referred to as the water shepherd, the water jockey, the water sheriff, the water whisperer sometimes. Basically anything and everything that has anything to do with water use here in the Blue River Basin, I'm responsible for it. As I'm sure all of you are very well aware, there's a very limited supply. That supply is dwindling in large part due to climate change and increasing temperatures. And we also have a growing population. The estimates that I've seen for Colorado, we're currently at 5 million. We're expected to double by about mid-century. And so what I am responsible for doing is basically making sure everyone who has a water right is using only as much water as they're legally entitled to. And whether that's a private well in your backyard, all the way up to the Denver Waters and the Colorado Springs and the ski resorts and golf courses, just making sure that they're all kind of following the rules of those court decrees that they were issued for their water rights. Another very important aspect of my job is well inspections, well permitting. I also do dam inspections. So each division has one dam safety engineer, and that dam safety engineer is responsible for the entire division. So we have we have a couple dam safety engineers for Division 5. But I am the boots in the field, boots on the ground. So when I'm out doing my rounds, checking water diversions, talking to irrigators, water users, I'll also check out the dams and do kind of spot checks because having participated in dam inspections, I kind of know what the dam engineers are looking for. So I'm kind of me and all my counterparts across the state, we're responsible for kind of watching after that. Water court applications, Taylor also mentioned water court applications. I'm kind of the first review of those water court applications that come in here in the Blue River Basin. I provide a review that then goes to the Division 5 office in Glenwood Springs, and then it goes to the water referee for Division 5, and then goes in front of the judge. So I'm kind of the boots in the field, kind of making sure that everything that's being claimed or proposed in those water right applications is accurate and valid and is doable. It's not really in my job description, but I look at this as probably the most important part of my job, and that's the outreach and education. Because fundamentally, it's my belief that these bigger picture issues that were brought up and that we're all facing and are coming down the pike, and believe me, they're coming. You know, you've got two of the biggest reservoirs, the two largest reservoirs in the country, sitting at about 24% capacity. And, you know, if that's not kind of the writing on the walls, I don't know what is. So this outreach and education to me is critical. You know, if folks don't have just a very fundamental, basic understanding of water, its importance, its significance, and where it comes from, and its limitations, and the demands that we place on it, if folks aren't informed, they can't make those better educated decisions, you know, in their local communities, in their counties, statewide, and on a regional level. So I'm very thankful for this opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you, Taylor, for organizing this. Thank you all for being here. One thing I'll also say, and it's kind of just one of the problems that we're faced with, is I look across this audience and I see a lot of familiar faces. And it's kind of the same folks who come out to these events. And I would encourage all of you, maybe next time at Summit County 101 or 201 or 301, grab a few neighbors and bring them out, because we really do need to educate everyone about these issues. So I think that's about it. I look forward to your questions, and thank you for coming out. Appreciate it.
Kendra, I think you're next.
Great. All right. Well, my name is Kendra. I am with the Blue River Watershed Group, and we are if you look at, we've got our state regulation, and that feeds into the Colorado district. If you drill it down to our local basin, that's what the Blue River Watershed Group is here to do, is kind of help manage that. So we do restoration, water management planning, and outreach. So in the restoration of this area, here's an example of the Swan River. This is an amazing project that's done. It's kind of I don't know what you would call that, like a flagship. It's beautiful. Everybody's like, that is so dope. And I'm like, I know, right? Because what we have as our history in Summit County is a significant amount of mining. And so groups like the Watershed Group are collaborating with the county, the town of Breck, and reaching for funding from the state, from the River District, thank you, and beyond. And the Bureau of Reclamation, you know, we're getting federal and state funding to make what we saw in 2015 into what we see in 2017. And if you go out there now, there's some vegetation that's not just this big. So we're making progress. And the reason we had to do that is there was about 30 feet of mining tailings in the Swan River that had been turned up by a historic dredge mine and just kind of left there for the last 100 years. Nothing really grew there on top of it because it's just a bunch of cobblestone. And so in order to make it back into a river and connect the bottom of the river to the top of the river, we had to actually remove a bunch of material. So hundreds of thousands of cobblestone pounds were removed. And then a stream that's meandering for the right slope of that grade was created. And that will slowly kind of grow outside of those boundaries. Right now it looks very much like a snake. And hopefully we'll start to see those banks overflow at times and create wetlands. And in the reach just above the one that's shown on the picture on the right, there are more places for the river to overflow. So we're learning as we go, and these restoration projects are getting better, but there's only half of this project has been completed. So you'll see this is something that locally that we can do to not only absorb more water by creating more wetlands and bringing our water surface level as opposed to running through mine tailings. But you'll also see that this is projects that need to happen up at the headwaters because we're the top of the system. And so if we can transmit the cleanest water and we can capture the most water, then we're not sending it down to a place for it to evaporate quickly, and we're not contaminating that water. So some other history from the Watershed group. There's the 10 Mile Creek project. If you've ever parked at Conoco at Copper Mountain, then if you go up the bike path, then you're going to see what used to be a stream that was really confined by the highway and by the mountain, the sky chutes. Then we've given it a little bit more space, and we've kind of given it some meanders so that it's not just creating these bars of sediment in the center. And now it's meandering, and it's actually quite lush with willows there. So it's a beautiful new spot. I encourage you to check it out. But it's just, these are things that are happening in our location in the Blue River Basin, because we need to manage our water here, just like we need to manage the whole system. The Peru Creek mines, you guys might have known that up past Keystone, there's some pretty funky color water. And so that was where the Watershed group started, was trying to address some of that real damaging history there and turning what was like this orange gloop into something that is no longer providing orange gloop, although there's still plenty of orange. If you're interested in seeing some cool colors, you can still find some up in that part of the basin. But what you're just, it's important that we address this history so that we can make our basin the best that it can be and the safest for ourselves and for the next generations. So again, kind of backing up, we had the Blue River group, our watershed group. We're making local plans. We're boots on the ground, kind of like Troy was saying. We're like the local little action. And then we try and feed that information to the Colorado Basin Roundtable, who then feeds into the Colorado Water Plan. So you might have heard about the Blue River Integrated Water Management Plan, or an IWMP. Stream management planning is something that's happening across the state. And the goal of that is that we create plans for small areas that can then inform bigger basins and inform the Colorado Water Plan. So the IWMP is in partnership with Drought Unlimited, and they started it with a group of stakeholders who said, hey, have you noticed that we don't have as cool of a fishery below the dam anymore? And do you know why that is? And people had theories, but we really need to prove what's going on with science so that we can create restoration projects that will address that and improve the fisheries. So that Blue River IWMP is underway. We've done 3 years of research. We've got Peggy measuring rocks, trying to find fish habitat. We've got kind of a funky river that was made for a lot of flow. Then we put a dam above it, and we've cut off a lot of that flow. And so it's just a very different river than what it is made to be. What it was historically is now significantly different. And so we need to figure out how can we make this river the best it can be for the conditions that we have and we're going to continue to have, and the flows that are probably just going to be lower and lower. So then the last thing that not the last thing, but on a sidebar, what we do, I'm just kidding. We really want to go with a lot of outreach. It's really important that you're teaching your neighbors, your kids, your friends about the watershed, about how they can protect their local area, because that will translate into what you can do for the state and for the country. So things that we're doing, we have a big formal kind of bigger version of this in the spring, right before peak runoff. So if you come join us sometime around May 11th, we'll have a bunch of these wonderful experts come talk to you in Silverthorne. We do big river cleanup every year. We do volunteer restoration. We do education. And it's a pretty awesome group. So I recommend that you check out our website, blueriverwatershed.org. And if you sign up for our newsletter, then I'll email you like maybe once a month, if I can remember, about all the events that we're having, the ways that you can get involved or that you can learn. I'll give you updates on things that are happening. And if you want to get involved with something like river restoration, or if you want to come plant more seeds at the Swan River, we'd love to have you. So check us out, and thanks for your support, everybody.
I'm Rachel Zarowen. I'm from the High Country Conservation Center. I brought my phone because Taylor said something earlier that I thought was fantastic that I want to come back to. And I don't want to forget it. So I'm just put that right there. How many of you guys have heard of HC3 or the High Country Conservation Center? Ooh, yes. Yes. Like Troy said, though, tell your friends. So what we do, how many of you guys knew we worked on water conservation? Ooh, okay, so not quite as many. All right, so we're getting there. Okay, so what we do, our mission is to promote practical solutions for resource conservation. Oops, thank you. Oh, there's a mic up here. Okay, our mission is to promote practical solutions to resource conservation in our mountain community. So like Kendra, we're very focused locally here in Summit County. That's what we focus on. So a lot of folks know us from our green recycling shirts, and that's still a huge part of what we do, waste reduction. But if you can think of our organization, it's really climate action. Waste reduction feeds into climate action. We help people get behind the wheel of electric vehicles. We help people get solar panels on their rooftops, and we also help people conserve water inside their homes, outside their homes, and at their businesses. We work really closely with local governments and a lot of different people on these projects. So when we think about what guides our work at HC3, I'm really excited to be up here and sharing this time with so many fabulous people that we get to learn so much from. So as Kendra has restoration and so many other projects, we focus really closely on efficiency. And what guides our work is that we have a regional state-approved water efficiency plan. And that feeds, again, into that Colorado water plan. And so we work with water providers and local governments to help people conserve water and to be more efficient. So what that means for all of you in this room is, thanks to the Community Funding Partnership, and we were able to leverage state funds, thank you guys, you all can get rebates to get your irrigation systems checked out, to get more efficient irrigation equipment, and then we'll also be doing a lot of just educational activities next year so we can learn about all this stuff. So that's really what guides our work. And as we think about, like, you all heard a lot of big issues out there, and I think Troy gave you one really great solution: tell all your friends. And when we think about all the challenges all across the river, it's like, oh gosh, that's bigger than me. What can I do? I'm going to tell you. When you get home, if it's not too dark, look at your lawn, right? How much irrigation is it using? Do you have irrigated turf grass? Also, you know, even if you don't have irrigated turf grass, maybe you have irrigation, or how can you use less water? HC3 can connect you with a landscaper to help you use less. And that's whether you live in a single family home, a condominium complex, or maybe it's where you work or go to church. So all of those places we can help out. That's one thing. Tell your neighbors. That's another thing. Third thing, we have Commissioner Blanchard in the room. Thank you for prioritizing this. Talk to your elected officials. I'm not going to call you out, but if you've never attended a town council meeting, now's the time. I'm serious. Like, you can. It's so easy to email an elected official, pick up the phone and call them right here in Summit County, because that matters and they pay attention. So those are the three things that you have to do. And then those are your solutions. And then the thing that Taylor mentioned, and I'm just going to read it out: the future will not look like the past. I thought that was so important, right? It's easy to sit back and be like, oh, we're at the top of the watershed. It's fine. Wherever you are, the future will not look like the past. So use those solutions. There's our info. Thanks, guys.
Wow, what an amazing panel. Thank you all so much. I learned something. I get to listen to these folks and other folks speak about these issues all the time, and I'm continually learning. The number one thing I've learned beyond the future will not look like the past is that I still have so much to learn, as we all do. Thank you all for being here. Please spread the word. Stay tuned for our next County 101